Hello. Okay, I believe we are live. Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to this LinkedIn Live. My name is Kelvin Claveria. I'm a B2B and demand gen marketer from Vancouver, Canada. Really excited to talk to you today about how we can use LinkedIn to build our personal brands and make more meaningful connections. So I invited Karine and Bianca here today to talk to us about that. Just want to mention one quick thing before we get going. This is not a formal presentation or anything like that, so we don't have a PowerPoint deck. My apologies if you are a PowerPoint fan. But this is going to be kind of like a very casual Q&A format. But we would love to hear from you. So if you have any questions or comments, feel free to use the comment feature. And I believe I'll see them here, but I'll check LinkedIn as well. So if you have any questions, please feel free to comment. And I'm pretty sure we can interact with that as well post event. So yeah, let us know. And of course, if you have any tips as well, feel free to share. All right. So yeah, it's my pleasure to welcome Karine and Bianca. Hello. How are the both of you today?
Doing
We're
great.
good.
Yeah. Thanks for having us.
Awesome. Well, I really admire what you've done on LinkedIn the past year. And one of my personal goals for this year is to actually post a little bit more on LinkedIn. So I thought I should reach out. So, yes, thanks for your time. Maybe let's give everyone a quick overview about the two of you to start, professional background and things like that, or whatever you want to share. Let's start with you, Bianca.
Cool. So, hi everyone. I'm Bianca Johnston. I'm in Toronto, and I would describe myself as a market researcher slash marketer. I'm kind of straddled the two worlds. So, I started my career agency side marketing, then did a long period in market research client side roles, and then most recently made the jump back to marketing. I currently work at Shopify as an integrated campaign lead. So I own creative and messaging strategy for our offline channels. And really what I do is I take the insights from when I was on the insights team and from our great insights team, and I basically create creative and messaging strategies using those audience insights, and then create campaigns out of that. So that's a little bit about me.
Cool. How about you, Karine?
Um, for me, I work for a full-service boutique market research agency, and I run end-to-end quantitative projects. I've been doing that for over 20 years now, so it's hard to believe. And I've always worked in research. A lot of people in market research say they fell into market research, but for me, it was really love at first sight. I took a lot of research classes in college. And when I was introduced to SPSS, I was like blown away by the power of statistics and of surveys. And I knew that this is what I wanted to do. I started out as a survey programmer. Not a lot of people know that, but I did that for a few months, and then I transitioned to full service, and I've been doing that ever since.
Great. Yeah, thank you for the overview. Karine is too humble to say this, so I'm just gonna say it for her. But she's actually also an award-winning researcher. She won a Quicks Award last year, so congrats on that.
True. Thank you. You're too kind.
Congrats.
So as I mentioned, the two of you are
Yeah.
really rocking LinkedIn. Really loving your content. Definitely, I see you basically almost every day on LinkedIn. So and that's great. Just curious how you got started. What inspired you to participate more? And maybe for those who don't follow you yet, maybe give us a quick overview of what your content is all about.
Yeah, well, I'll go first. For me, I was so I guess it's been, it's kind of a progressive journey, right? You don't kind of wake up and be like, oh, that's it, I'm posting on LinkedIn every day. That's kind of not what happened. So for me, what happened is I love talking about surveys, and people in my real life got tired of me talking about surveys. So I'm like, I need new friends. But then I started joining online survey panels just for the fun of it. And I wrote an article in Green Book about my experience, which I posted on LinkedIn, and realized, wow, there's a lot of people who like to geek out about surveys. It's not just me, because, it got a lot of reaction, and I just kind of started from there.
Cool. How about you, Bianca?
I love that. And I just want to jump on that and say what I noticed first about Karine's profile is that she wrote something like, nobody loves surveys as much as I do. And I was thinking, I might be second. I might be second in line. But like, I also do as such, like surveys are my jam. Love them as well. So love Karine's content. But yeah, for me, it was a little bit different. It actually was well, it was a lot of thinking. And then it was like one day I was like, I post on LinkedIn. So it was less organic. There was more like a line in the data, as they say, but it was all in my head until I started doing it. And so the reasons for me were really, number one, as I said, I made a jump from market research into a more marketing focused role. And so I wanted to really stay connected to my market research craft. It's something that I love and I will always love and will always use in any kind of job I have in the future. But really wanted to stay connected and made sure I didn't sort of lose that connection to the research world. The other reason was just, I noticed a lot more like LinkedIn had become more of a creator sort of type place and social media platform. And I just noticed a lot of people talk about the value they've gotten from posting, especially in networking. And for me, this is a more fun way to network and meet people. And I've already met so many great people in just a few months. And then the third reason for me was really, I had a sort of goal for last year to do shit that scares you. And so the thought of doing this was terrifying. And I sat on it in my head for a long time before actually doing it. And then finally was like, well, the year's almost up. I got to do this thing. So those were sort of the motivations for me.
Yeah, that's awesome. I was gonna say too for Karine, like I noticed your URL, the LinkedIn URL is like Data Fairy or something like that.
Oh,
So
I'm
really
so
fun.
flattered you actually noticed. I was thinking about that, and the URL that they provide is like Karine.whatever 12345, and I'm like, well, that's not very inspiring. So I realized you can actually change it, and I changed it.
Yeah, and Bianca, I love it too that you mentioned that this is what's your New Year's resolution for 2023. So that's
Yeah.
great. It sounds like you can check that off as that, right?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, so I kind of like Bianca. I work in marketing actually, technically. Although I've been working in insights for like 11 years. So one of the things that we get asked all the time is, what's the ROI? So maybe let's get that out of the way and talk about it. What are some of the benefits in terms of that you've seen in participating on LinkedIn?
Yeah, I can go first for this one. So as I sort of alluded to already, I have met a lot of great people, and I've only been doing this really consistently for like since the beginning of September. So I have met people virtually, in person, like people, are like, I'm going to be in Toronto. Do you want to meet? And I was like, okay, I'm going to go meet a stranger from the internet now. But everyone has been wonderful. I've made great connections. People have reached out about different things. So definitely that's been a great impact of it so far. And it's still early days. So I imagine that's just going to get better and better. The other for me is like I've really clarified my thinking. We have all these opinions in our head and we sort of, in the old days of working in the office, I'm fully remote now, but, we'd kind of sit around the lunch table and we used to call it like solving the world's research problems, and we'd talk through these things. And now like, same thing, Karine, like my cat, my husband, my kids, they don't want to hear about this. So I was like, I just need to, clarify. And it's easy to have these opinions in your head, but once you start like writing them and putting them out there, it really makes you clarify them and kind of like elevate that thinking a little bit. So that was another, and then just like copywriting, I guess, content creation and writing. And that's an ongoing learning process, but those have been the real big kind of learnings and impact that I've seen so far.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's been kind of similar for me. I think, because of all of the people I met on LinkedIn and then off LinkedIn after meeting them on LinkedIn, I've had so many conversations and I've really grown a lot as a researcher because, our industry is so fragmented, right? You have panels, you have researchers and, operations and all of that. And these people don't always talk to each other. So what that made me realize is that, with all these conversations, everybody has pain points. And I feel I have a much better understanding of everybody's point of view. So even now when I design surveys, I think, oh, well, this person's going to hate that. So I'm not going to do that. And, try to make things better. So it's really more this journey of just growing as a, big picture sort of researcher that LinkedIn has allowed me to do.
Wow. Yeah, that's really cool. And it reminds me of, I don't know who said it, but there's this saying that goes something like, kind of like you write so that you think, so that you can think, something along those.
Yeah.
So that definitely is something that I've noticed as well. Have there been any unexpected benefits? Perhaps because I think there's some trickle effects, right? I think Bianca, you already mentioned some of this, like being able to network with people. But I wonder if there are any other ones. So, for example, interviews with podcasts and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, as for me, I have been invited on a few podcasts or asked for my opinion for articles that people were writing. I don't know if this gets old, but every time it does feels very flattering. You're like, oh, you read it, somebody reads it. So I think that is very cool when people reach out and want to talk more. I mean, like maybe podcast is like the extreme, but just people reaching out and say, hey, I have a few ideas, or I'm working on this product. Do you want to have a look at it? Curious what you think. And I think that is a very cool, and this would definitely not happen if, I'm working from home too. I'm by myself all day, that without LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. Same here. I actually did my first podcast yesterday, so that was very exciting. And I have
Wow, you're on a roll.
Yeah, I know, busy week. Coming up later in the month, I think. So yeah, a little bit of that as well. People reaching out, asking about services, which I don't do. I have a full-time job, but just kind of interesting to see. And then I can always refer them to other people. So it's just, it's great for networking in all sorts of ways.
Wow, awesome. That's great. Yeah, looking forward to hearing that podcast, Bianca.
I'll post
it. Let's talk about challenges or downsides. Have you seen any so far?
You want to go?
I can go. There's lots.
Okay.
So honestly, at the beginning, especially like just imposter syndrome, being like, who wants to hear what I have to say? Like I said, I sat on this for a long time before doing it. I had I'm one of those, this whole conversation, James Clear, action versus motion. Like I was the motion person, the behind the scenes planning, putting things into my Notion, just too much, just like procrastinating. So that is very real. And I think everybody encounters that to some degree. So sort of the imposter syndrome, and then just the ideation of like, what am I going to write about? And for me, around like 8 weeks, it started to flow a lot better. Like I'm obviously, like, I analyze everything I do because I'm a researcher. So I know the 8-week mark. But it started to, but before then it was very much like, oh God, here's another week. What am I going to write? And so I think that was definitely a challenge. And then just figuring out how to block out the time, especially alongside a full-time job. Like I take my Sunday mornings, I go to a coffee shop, I just like hammer out a few posts. I mean, that's what it's like now, but it was not easy like that at the beginning.
Yeah.
For me, I mean, there's always a bit the challenge of inspiration, but I get the inspiration from my work, because I do research every day and I feel these challenges every day. That's kind of where it comes, it comes. I guess the challenge for me is, when you talk about controversial topics, then sometimes not everybody agrees with you. But I have to say that it has been very positive and constructive. But I've had, negative feedback as well. And ironically, they came from people I was least expecting. And I'm just going to leave it as that and slowly back away now. And but that could be a challenge. So you just need to kind of, as a researcher, sort of think, okay, well, that's not the majority. So let's go with the highest percentage of people.
Yeah. I'm curious if we can double click on that a little bit, Corinne. So I mean,
No.
I mean, if you get negative feedback, I think it's sort of like it comes with the territory of being a quote unquote creator, right? Like you are gonna get at one point some sort of like disagreement, and great that it's constructive. Just curious, like how do you sort of manage that? Do you reach out through DM to try to kind of explain it a little bit more? Do you use the comments to expand a little bit more? Just curious about some techniques that you might.
Yeah, I mean, most of the time, this is all public, right? This is all like, and when people just respectfully sort of like, disagree with you, then that's totally fine, and I can see, and I think everybody kind of grows from that and then keeps that in mind. If it's something more personal, then I think you just have to ignore it. If you think that you're doing the right thing, and you feel like this is more a personal thing rather than a professional thing, then you just need to let it go.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I love that. So if it's like sort of like trying to determine whether they're commenting on kind of like the idea versus the person, right?
Exactly.
Like, right. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. Cool. Okay. I love that. Now I want to make sure that people who are newbies as well find some value in this. So, I talk to a lot of researchers when they go to conferences, and when I ask them if they're on LinkedIn, they're like, "Oh, yes, I'm there, but I don't post much." And usually it's because they're intimidated. They're not sure where to start. So, just curious if you can provide any tips in terms of how people can get started. You want to start, Bianca?
Sure. Yeah. So there you can follow creators kind of outside of the research space, and they'll often post things like, here are 15 ideas to stories, things that happened at work, like Corinne said, like inspiration from your job. So like that's a quick sort of thought starter. But for me, I just I like to go to, first of all, realizing that if you have any work experience, you have a lot more knowledge in your brain that people want to hear about than you think. So, pick the things that interest you the most and kind of start with three things. Who am I talking to? What is the message I want to say? And what is the takeaway? And some tip that some people say is like, write to yourself, X number of years ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, even. And so that's kind of how I started. I, to Corinne's point earlier, was one of those people who fell into research. And I took some courses, but I learned a lot of it on the job. And so back then, secretly Googling, how do I do my job? And so I like to think, back then, I was just someone would tell me, and I had great people helping me and managers and like teaching me the ropes, but sometimes you're kind of nervous to ask and stuff. So that's how I started, just like really like, here is, me, however many years ago, what I would have wanted to know. So I think that's one way to start.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
So I think for me, one thing that people often forget is that, if you want people to engage with you, you have to engage with them. And the easiest way to do that is comment on their post. And it's a lot less intimidating than writing your own post. But I think it's half the battle, to be honest. You have to, you writing your own post is important, but commenting on people's posts is also important. So that's really where I would start. And then another thing that I think you have to do is you have to write about something you love, because you cannot possibly be consistent to writing every, once, twice a week about something you don't like. I just can't see that happen. Yeah. Right. So, and then I think as just like some background, it is interesting to kind of understand how the LinkedIn algorithm works, just from the beginning, but there's so much, like, don't overthink it either. If you Google that, like, how do I get views on my post? You're going to get like 100 tips and like, well, I can't do all of this, but just kind of learn the basics of how it works. And I think that will go a long way at the beginning.
Right. Yes. Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, there's definitely like people who try to game the algorithm, I guess, or like learn it. But at the same time, it changes all the time. So being a slave to the algorithm is kind of a tricky proposition, I think.
Yeah.
So true. It's like so many things, learn kind of the rules, but then know when to break them. And if it doesn't feel authentic to you, like for instance, I don't do a lot of selfies. I have no problem with selfies. I like seeing other people's faces, but that's something everybody says, do the selfie and I'm just like not really selfie ready most days. So I just don't do that very often.
And that's a good point too. Like, I think you have to use techniques that feel authentic to you, Like for some people, it's like writing. For some people, they like videos.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Okay, so this kind of leads to the next question that I had, which is about experimentation. I've seen the two of you sort of like experiment with a few maybe types. So for example, carousels, photos, text-only posts. And I think it's really great because you keep it very interesting for your audience. Just curious if you could share any techniques that have worked for you in terms of like maximizing your reach or maximizing engagement. I know, algorithm is not something that we try to game, as we just talked about, but just curious if there's anything that you've noticed that work really well.
Gosh, for me, it's a hard question because I've used Carousel if I felt like there was a story to tell and it was actually easier. As researcher, we're just trying to tell a story. So I'm not thinking, okay, I'm going to do a carousel now. Let's figure out what I say in it. It's more like I'm writing a post and I realize, well, it's a lot, right? Like people won't follow. So then I made it into a carousel and I think that works. I use the photo a lot because I feel like this catches people's attention more. And it's a great way of illustrating the story of what you're trying to tell. But I don't know if I can really link a format to the number of views or to the reaction. You know, I think it's really more about the content. And what's more important is when you post. I think you have to post at a time where your network is online. If you post in the middle of the night and no one reacts, no one looks at it, then it will be deprioritized, right, by LinkedIn. And I think that's really the more important thing, more than the actual format of what you're showing.
Cool. What do you think,
Yeah.
Bianca?
I totally agree. I like to go kind of like in the morning of my working hours as much as possible, but yeah, very least during the working days. So I agree with that for sure. In terms of format, similar for me. I'm trying different things. Honestly, sometimes it's just about how much time I have, and I'm like, oh, only have time for a short post. It's going to be text. And same thing, I found that you're kind of writing something and it gets long, so I turned it into a carousel. But then I was like, oh, you know what? This is actually way too long for a carousel. So this should be like multiple different posts. So like, I'm still learning. Like as I kind of try different formats, I just kind of did my first sort of case study. I'd like to bring more of the market research and marketing world sort of together. So that's a new one I'm experimenting with. But I also don't look at the like obviously I look at likes and comments and stuff, but it doesn't mean everything. You kind of have to think about your objectives, and so I don't look at that too often, and my husband's very good at reminding me of that. You know, I kind of like for every 3 months we'll maybe look back and be like, okay, what worked or didn't. But honestly, so much of it is changing on the back end, and we're pretty blind to the algorithm outside of like a few basics. So really it's just I try to remember to make my key metric like, am I still enjoying this, or did good conversations come out of this and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Not to say I don't care about the other stuff. We all do to some extent because it's, you know, it's fun. But really, like, yeah, this has to be fun to keep doing it. And
Yeah, cool. Yeah, definitely. In terms of experimentation, it's just funny because like I think it was like 2022, maybe 2021, like when LinkedIn was prioritizing polls. So I remember like everyone would like use polls, and sometimes they're not even interesting polls, but like it's like okay. So it's interesting. It's good to see that LinkedIn has moved past that, though.
It's true. So if you're curious, I've heard they're now looking for shorter carousels, which I'm not good at. Mine end up being pretty long, and cheat sheets, kind of like one pagers. Because we think of what LinkedIn's trying to do. It's trying to keep people engaged on the platform. Deprioritizing links away and stuff like that. So yeah. That stuff, so.
Yeah, there's a term for that. Zero-click content.
Yes, that's right.
Yes. Yes, curious. I mean, I think Bianca, you mentioned this already. Like, I think you mentioned like looking at like creators who are not in research space necessarily. I was wondering if you have any kind of like people that you admire on LinkedIn that you can tell us about, and what are they doing well?
Oh yeah, for sure, lots. So two of my favorites are Caitlin Burgoyne, I think is how you say her last name, and Neil O'Grady, also both Canadians. She's in Quebec now, he's out in Victoria. And they actually ran a cohort course called the Unignorable like Audience Challenge or something, which I took. So I follow their content a lot, but I also like took a class with them, which I would highly recommend. And they are really smart in the marketing space, and they talk a lot about, you know, techniques, especially Neil. He'll have things on like how to write hooks and stuff like that. But I think they do it in a really authentic way, and so I definitely recommend them. I'm blanking on some others. Kieran Drew is one. He's a little more, he kind of writes online. He's a little bit more active on Twitter/X, but he's on LinkedIn as well. It's another one. Yeah.
Cool.
I'm not as sophisticated as Bianca as far as content creation goes. I tend to follow market researchers, you know, people that are kind of famous in our industry. But in terms of content, I do like Priscilla McKinney over at Little Bird Marketing. I think she has some great LinkedIn tips in a class as well, which I haven't taken, but she does have a class. But I also like her as a writer. I think that's important because it's not all about hooks and this and that, but sometimes it's just about the personality that comes through your writing, you know, and you find people interesting because of that. So, you know, she's one example, but I really do have to fix my LinkedIn feed. It's a mess. Like, I have no idea what happened there, but you know, like what LinkedIn shows you is based on who you follow and stuff. And I don't know, something went wrong. I do need to kind of figure out like, how do I curate this a little bit more? And, you know, there's all this suggested content. And I don't know what I'm doing and why LinkedIn thinks that this is for me, but it's not.
Right. Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned Priscilla Corinne, because I mean, to some extent, this event was sort of inspired by her. Because last time I saw you, you were talking about how collaboration's the new competition. Sorry,
Yes.
I have it the opposite. Right. And I'm like, oh yeah, I should collaborate with more people. So to some
Yeah.
extent, this was a product of that. So
Well, I have something coming up too, kind of along the same lines. So stay tuned for that.
okay, awesome. That's great. Um, yeah, so let's talk about some don'ts, things that people should avoid. Yeah, just curious if you've noticed anything that we should. I guess one of them is like don't post during the middle of the night.
Yeah.
But is there
Yeah.
anything else?
So I'm not a LinkedIn algorithm expert, but I think the other thing to be careful about is the resharing. If you just reshare something, it will get fewer views. So what I try to do is link the article myself in my comment. So write a post about it and then link the article in the comments. So, it doesn't, LinkedIn doesn't know that there's a article that people will go to, I guess. So I don't know if this is all like urban legend or if this is actually true, but in general, if you just reshare something and there's not even like a thought about it, I don't think that this post will go very far.
Right.
Another one I've heard is that posting twice within, I think, 18 hours or something is it'll deprioritize the second one. So just space them out. And I mean, at least for me, I'm like, I would never post twice only because I don't have that much content. Like that's just harder. So no problem there. But if you're like, oh, I'm going to like just throw out a bunch of posts in over 2 days, spread them out like Monday, Wednesday, Friday or something.
Yeah, you can schedule them if you're like really eager to get them out. Just schedule them.
Yeah. I attended this webinar one time where they were like, they were saying even if you like edit your content within like the first 10 minutes, it gets deprioritized. There's like things like that, but I think for the most part, people probably shouldn't worry about that. Although I do think the sharing a link, that's definitely like something that's been well tested. And it comes back to what we're talking about in terms of like zero-click content. Like LinkedIn wants you to stay there, so you kind of have to think of a format where people can stay there, and then if they want to learn more, sharing that link in a more interesting way.
Yeah.
I saw somebody in the comments ask if we could put the names of these people that we're mentioning, and absolutely. And just one more came to mind. His name is Sam Brown with an E at the end. He recently did a carousel of like, this is the latest in LinkedIn algorithm. And I don't know how he knows, but I'm like, I'm not going to look into it. So I'll trust this and then take it with a grain of salt. I think like, same thing on hooks and copywriting stuff. Like they are frameworks and formulas, and they are good for an extent. Like if you don't hook someone in to read it, they're not going to read your post at all. So like there's value there, but don't become a slave to all these things. Like make sure you're authentically you, and just like, honestly, just consistency is a thing. Because the more you do it, the more you get feedback, the more you'll learn. Like it's scary at first, but it's easier.
Yeah, and I think you have to test it for yourself as well. It's like anything marketing related, you're going to get a lot of tips about subject lines and things like that, but you have to test it yourself and kind of see what works for your audience, what works for your business.
Exactly.
But yeah, definitely we'll respond to the comments later. It's a little bit hard to like do the live thing and then also comment. But we'll do that. I'm interested in the course as well that you mentioned, Bianca. So I'll hopefully we can get that later.
For sure.
Let me see. Okay, we have a few more minutes. Hopefully you don't mind staying on. Just maybe a quick round of questions. In your opinion, what's the best time to post on LinkedIn?
I mean, for me, it's the morning because that's when, my network is. And because I'm on the West Coast, the earlier kind of the better, because there's also people in the UK and in Europe, who see it. So it's kind of, 6 a.m. on the West Coast.
Pacific, right.
Yeah. And I aim for like between 9 and 11 a.m., usually closer to 9 a.m.
Yeah,
Eastern time.
Cool. I think you mentioned this already, but how do you find something new to talk about on
LinkedIn? For me, I guess there's part of it is the work, right? Like doing the work. But Also, I listen to a lot of podcasts and I read a lot of articles and I read a lot of things on LinkedIn, and all of that is very inspiring. And it's not necessarily that I'll listen to a podcast and then I'll have an idea, but it's just somewhere all in the back of your head, right? And eventually it turns into a story somehow.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Same thing. Stuff that happens at work. I subscribe to a lot of newsletters, so that helps. Back to the commenting thing. Sometimes somebody will write a post and you'll comment something and you're like, like you're kind of taking it in a direction. You're like, that could actually be a post. So I just jot all those things down in a Notion, and then they turn into posts eventually.
Yeah, writing down your ideas is good, because I always think, and I think I've said this in one of your posts, Bianca, but you think you're gonna remember, but you don't. So every time I'm like, okay, I gotta write this, write this down. And then some of these ideas, after you kind of sleep on it, you're like, nah, I don't think that's, I don't think that's a good idea. And then whatever, but some stick. And so you have a list of ideas.
Yeah. This is it's a bit of a nerdy question, but how do you keep track of those ideas? Do you use like a note-taking app? Is it just like a note thing on your phone? Just curious if you have any tools that you use.
I love Notion. So I have like a little table in Notion that has sort of like content pillar and then like not too many columns, but there's just like a hit new button at the top and I just quickly jot it in there. Or I get a lot of things, like I go for daily walks and I get a lot of ideas when I'm walking. And so I'll just use the Notes app or voice to text on the Notes app, because I don't always want to stop in the winter and type. And then I'll just jot something down. And same thing with Green. Sometimes I'm like, yep, that's going to be a good post. Other times I'm like, this is half an idea at best. And I just like kind of throw it away. But you got to just get them down there, because you never know. It always feels like a video when you're walking.
I know, right? I do get a lot of ideas when I work out too. So I use the Note app on my phone. That's the easiest thing. And then I'll, if it was kind of good, then I'll put in a Google Sheet, and I have, just a Google Sheet, nothing sophisticated.
Yeah. Well, that's what's best though. I keep it simple, right? Maybe let's talk a little bit about tools very quickly. So besides Notion, the Notes app, for example, for your carousels, like, are there any tools that you use to kind of create content for LinkedIn?
Yep, for me, everything's in Notion, and then just Canva for carousels.
Yes, I love Canva.
I use Canva too. But I think we have to exchange tips on that, because I'm not as sophisticated as some people. I get lost in all the templates. I'm like, oh, this is nice. Oh, no, this one is nicer. And then I start over and I'm like, okay, I'm just not focusing here. Just focus.
It's too fun.
Yeah. Okay, let's wrap up here. Are there any other advice or tips that you wanted to share that maybe I haven't asked about?
I don't know. For me, I think we've covered it.
Yeah. Okay.
I think like this is going to sound super cliche, but just start. Like pick a date, and say I'm going to start. And let's say your goal at first is like I'm going to do this once a week. That's one a week, and then when that's feeling more comfortable, twice a week. I think the consistency is like pick something that you think you can be consistent with, because you can write things in a Notes app and a Google Doc all you want, but until you put it out there, you're not going to get that feedback to learn. So if this is something that you really want, it's all about just starting and like pick something that you can achieve for a consistent period of time, and then it'll get easier as you go.
Yeah. Cool. The one thing I would say is that for your content to have like a wider reach, you kind of need like a base of audience. So one thing I would recommend actually is to try to build your network proactively. So for example, if someone comments on your post and they're not connected to you yet, reach out to them and see if they would like to connect. Even like adding all of your colleagues, for example, is just like an easy, like a no-brainer way of like building your following.
Totally.
Obviously if you meet people at conferences, things like that.
Yeah.
Because like there's like a base, obviously. Like obviously people can outside of your network can see the content, but I think having a bigger audience to begin with is a good start.
Totally. Yeah. And if that's the goal, like turn on the creator mode on your profile. Yes. I think you'll get all your connections will turn into followers, and then you're like, boom, instant followers.
I think it's a smart idea if someone likes your post and comment on it, but you're not connected, because they already have something in common with you. right? So if they liked what you wrote, they will also like, so it's not like a sleazy thing of just going and just adding everybody on LinkedIn, right? You already have something in common, so it makes sense that you would do that. So that's a good tip.
Yeah, I have to confess, actually, I probably connected to like 10 new people from this event because they said they were attending. So I connected with them and I was like, hey, do you want to just connect? So that's great.
That's a good idea. I'll just go do that after.
Yeah, why not? I don't see why not. Okay, finally, if people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
LinkedIn. Probably just on LinkedIn, yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thanks so much for your time. I know you're very busy, so I'm going to let you go back to work. I have to work at 9 as well, so that's great. Thank you again for your time, and maybe we can do this sometime again.
Would love to. This was really fun.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Just a check-in at the end of the year to see how we did.
Yeah, totally. See if all this worked. So.
Yeah, we'll see how people react, and maybe we can do it more frequently. So thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Have a good
everyone.
day. Bye.
Bye.